Mr. Dean, you're known not only as a man of the cloth, but also as a great Irishman. But just how much of an Irishman are you, really?
I was dropped in Dublin by accident. To that extent, I'm Irish. But I'm not one of this land of slaves. I was born here, was educated here. I even ministered here, in Kilroot, in Laracor, and in Dublin. But not by choice.
But are you saying that you're ashamed of being an Irishman?
I've made provision in my will to be buried in England.
Quite, but that rather evades the question. Are you ashamed of being an Irishman?
No, I don't dislike Ireland. Only the people who are in power here. Grasping landlords, Dublin rascals, rough-faced products of Scots nonconformists. Unfed papist underlings. I hate them all. And the language here. Well, have you ever heard anything as barbarous and absurd as the sound of Irish place names? I defy any creature of human shape, except a wild Irishman, to pronounce those words.
And yet, despite these feelings, you remained as Dean of St. Patrick's Cathedral in Dublin for nearly 30 years. Now, why?
I was exiled to my native city. A city where rogues, slaves, and fools, they're bought, they're sold, very kindly sell themselves for nothing. A city where politicians fight over who's in the right and who's in the wrong. I once wrote a little ditty about their prattlings. How did it go now? And when their country lies in state, they only fight for fighting's sake, whilst English sharpers take their pay and then stand back to see fair play.
Would you have preferred to live in England?
Oh, corrupt as England is, it's a land of saints compared with Ireland.
Oh, England is corrupt, and Ireland is a land of knaves and rogues. What about the Scots?
Oh, they're the worst of all. No four-letter word ever obsessed me as much as the word Scot.
Mr. Dean, is this hatred of the Scots behind your attitude towards nonconformists?
Well, those wicked Puritans, now they began in Elizabeth's time to quarrel only with surplices, with the ring in matrimony, yes, cross baptism, things like that. But as time went on, what happened? Schisms, sectarian rows.
You're not on the side of Rome, are you?
Oh, now, Mr. Marlowe, now come, don't come crying no popery to me.
Well, no, you have given the Catholics a fair old roasting in your time. In fact, you've made some pretty obnoxious remarks about them in your various works. For instance, in your book, A Tale of the Tub, you referred to holy water as St. Peter's Universal Pickle. Now, you mock the Roman Catholics on the one hand, and then you tell me to stop crying no popery. Now, just where do you stand, Mr. Dean?
Well, the man who walks in fear of popery distracts himself from the everlasting perils of nonconformism.
Well, if I may say so, that seems a very tolerant attitude towards the papists, considering what they did to you.
Oh, I regard the papists as no more dangerous than their women and children. But in any case, I mean, most of what's blamed on popery, well, it's really the cunning invention of Scottish nonconformists.
So you're not unduly worried about the Roman Catholics?
Oh, not at all, not at all. As far as I'm concerned, the whole question of popery has been disposed of entirely. No, leave that sort of thing to the howling rabble and the lunatic clergymen who can inflame one another with cries of no popery.
Are you concerned about the Presbyterians?
Presbyterians. The Scots are a brave, industrious people. I admit that. Many of them are only too glad to exchange the barren hills of, or let's say, Lochaber for the more fruitful vales of Antrim or Down. They come over here by extreme parsimony and firm adherence to one another. They soon become rich. But, Mr. Marlowe, once they become the majority anywhere, they're none too patient with those who don't agree with them. Then, of course, they bring over with them from Scotland the most formidable notion of our church.
The Church of Ireland, you mean?
Church of Ireland.
Yes.
Which I think they regard as at least 3 degrees worse than Roman Catholicism. Well, it's not altogether surprising when you consider that they abolished episcopacy in their own country. So, as far as Presbyterians go, I'm concerned.
Yes, one can say that you are. But in that case, can I ask you, Mr. Dean, to define your own church? Because at the moment I'm rather confused as to what you want out of a church.
Well, let me enlighten you then, Mr. Marlowe. I was sent by Providence to be a clergyman.
Well, we'll have to take your word for that, Mr. Dean.
That's extremely impertinent, sir. Obedience to God is the only duty of man.
But which God?
The God who gave us the Word. And this Word is in the Gospels. And it is imperative that there be no tampering with and no embellishing of the plain English of the Gospels. No sooner is the Word of God revealed to man than he starts to edit, and to distort it. The Word of God does not need an editor.
So I take it you're against all simplification of the Bible?
I'm against those too numerous clergymen who are so misguided as to try and explain the inexplicable. Churchmen who deny God's right to propound a mystery and who take it upon themselves to try and explain it.
You would subscribe to a belief in a single authority?
Absolutely.
Now, could that be, Mr. Dean, because all your life you have in fact striven for high places yourself? I don't think you would deny that, well, you have gone out of your way to catch at the coattails of the great.
When I was very young, I had more desire to be famous than since. I admit that all my efforts, shall I say, to distinguish myself were because I wanted a fortune or a title. Yes, of course, I wanted to be treated like a lord.
Then how do you equate your belief in a single authority with your attacks upon the bishops of the Church of Ireland? Your masters, in fact.
Oh, I upheld the position, the titles, and the rights of the Church as by law established. I obeyed its rules, and I obeyed its rulers, appointed by the monarch. But I disliked many of the bishops, and I was totally opposed to the method of their appointment. Many of the bishops sent over to Ireland, in preference to better qualified Irish divines, were churchmen of, well, a very obscure condition, and really no more distinguished than chaplains to governors. And these same bishops, now, they not only occupied Irish sees, but frequently sent over for their old acquaintances or their relatives, and bestowed the gifts of preferment upon them.
You are now defending Ireland against the English bishops.
Oh, yes, yes. The University of Ireland, where the young are instructed with a great deal more discipline than either Oxford or Cambridge, is in the grip of England, and the worse for it.
In what way?
Well, because, Mr. Marlowe, the most of the posts are held by people from England. Now, they have neither interest, they have no property, acquaintance, or allegiance with this country. Now, where else in Europe would you find that?
Well,
no, you wouldn't find it anywhere else in Europe. In England, all the principal posts in civil employment are filled by people who reside in England. But here, well, bishops, that apt conjunction of black satin they call a bishop, and in many cases no credit at all to the church they serve. Well, they're covetous. They grasp every opportunity to increase their finances, to increase their power, whilst lessening both of the lower clergy.
Mr. Dean, Is your anger against the bishops, which you're certainly at no pains to conceal, is your anger really a result of the fact that you wanted and failed to obtain a bishopric in Ireland yourself?
No, no. Oh, I admit that I aimed at a bishopric in Ireland or a deanery in England, and I had to settle for the deanery of St. Patrick's in Dublin. I admit that.
Yes, and that must have been very disappointing to you.
Oh, I admit that too. But I did get my own back in a little verse I wrote to a fellow clergyman. How did it go now? Would you like to hear it?
Oh, yes, please.
If I can remember it. Then must it truly be confessed, our ministers are void of taste, when such adepts as you and I so long unbishopricked lie by, whilst dunces of the coarsest clay, who only know to preach and pray, devour the church's tiddest bits, the perquisites of pimps and wits, and leave us naught but guts and garbage. Well, it expressed my feelings at the time.
Well, yes, very admirably. And in fact, this brings us to another fascinating aspect of your work, Mr. Dean. I mean, your satirical writings. Now, for a man of the cloth, your writings must surely be amongst the most savage in the English language. You spared nobody. You attacked people in high places, and in fact, your vendetta against our greatest general resulted in his disgrace and his public dismissal. Now, do you think that it was necessary to go as far as you did in order to bring him down?
Well, if you mean who I think you mean, get the examiners and read them.
Yes.
The last 9 or 10, well, they're full of the reasons for the change,
yes,
and of the abuses of that last government.
Yes, in fact, I have read them, and quite frankly, I don't know how you got away with it, Mr. Dean, because, you see, TV interviewers like myself, we are constantly under attack every day. Whenever we talk to a cabinet minister about whether he drinks too much or whether we ask the leader of the opposition about his ability to lead his party. But you, a man of the cloth, you accuse the highest people in the land of every crime under the sun, and you are hailed as a prince of journalists.
Prince? Well, I did earn an honest living for a while in Grub Street, but then so have better men than I.
It's rather ironic, isn't it, that Winston Churchill, a relative of the man you brought down, should have said, satire should be used to lash the vices of a guilty age. Now, I presume that's what you'd claim to have done.
Well, what is satire, Mr. Marlowe?
Well, you're the expert, you tell me.
It's a sort of glass wherein the man who looks usually sees everybody else's face except his own. And I think that is the main reason why so few people are offended by it.
You're saying that the people you attacked didn't recognize themselves in your writings.
Well,
because at one moment you said, for instance...
You've done your homework very well, Mr. Marlowe.
Thank you. Could I just finish for a moment? You said of the Queen's representative in Ireland...
I know what I said about him.
Yes, I know, but some of our viewers may not have read what you wrote, Mr. Dean. Could I just quote to you this article from the Examiner? You said of the Lord Lieutenant of Ireland, he, by the force of a wonderful constitution, has some years passed his grand climacteric without any visible effects of old age, either on his body or his mind, and in spite of a continual prostitution to those vices which generally wear out both. He swears solemnly he loves you and will serve you, and your back is no sooner turned, but he tells those about him that you are a dog and a rascal. He goes constantly to prayers, yet will talk bawdy and blasphemy at the chapel door. He's a Presbyterian in politics and an atheist in religion. At present, he chooses to whore with a papist. He bears the gallantries of his lady with the indifference of a stoic, and thinks them well recompensed by a return of children to support his family without the fatigues of being a father. Now, you don't deny writing that about the highest man in this country.
Of course I don't deny it.
Then how do you justify, Mr. Dean, such a vicious attack upon a great man?
I have had the honor of much conversation with his lordship, and I know just how indifferent he is to applause and how insensible he is to reproach.
How could any man be insensible to a scurrilous attack like that? You deliberately set out to use your razor-edged wit to destroy this man.
Oh, not a razor, Mr. Marlowe. You can't chop blocks with razors.
What do you use?
A pickaxe. A pickaxe that perforates with one end and drags about with the other.
Well, you certainly had no time for his lordship.
Oh, he's the most universal villain I ever...
But, Mr. Dean, Excuse me for a moment. Yes? Yes? Okay. Yeah, right. I'm sorry about that. Where were we? Can I just move on from this point, Mr. Dean? Yes, could I ask you about this? You once wrote, "My hate, whose lash just heaven had long decreed, shall on a day make sin and folly bleed." Now, I don't know how far your hatred was divinely inspired, Mr. Dean, but you've certainly made people bleed by the lash of your pen. Now, do you ever regret your actions?
My cause is just, Mr. Marlowe. My one great motive is submitting to the pleasures of Providence and to the laws of my country.
Just a minute. Are you saying that this is God's work that you're doing? Muckraking? Attacking the highest people in the land? Ruining public and private reputations by snide attacks? Oh, come, Mr. Dean. Surely you attack these people because you hate them?
Oh, the man who describes the nature of a snake, or a fox, or a crocodile, huh? Or a wolf, he does it for the sake of other people. Not because he bears any particular love or hate towards the animals
We're not
themselves.
talking about animals, Mr. Dean. We're talking about men and women whom you have, by consistent attacks, ruined. You even attacked ladies of the court.
Ladies.
The Duchess of Somerset, Mistress of the Robes to Her Majesty the Queen.
Oh, carrots, yes.
Yes, and if you remember, the Duchess called you a man of no principles, either of honor or religion.
And do you know what I called the Duchess? I called her an old red-haired murdering hag.
Because she was responsible for persuading the Queen not to have you made a bishop.
Because she was responsible for the death of her second
Are you
husband.
denying that she was responsible more than any other person for having prevented you from becoming a bishop?
Well, she won't live forever, and neither will the Queen.
And neither will you, Doctor. Unless, of course, you have yet another special dispensation from Providence regarding mortality.
Look, Mr. Marlowe. There are 3 ways that a man can avenge himself of the censure of this world.
Yes.
He can despise it.
Yes.
To try and live so as to avoid it, or to return the censure of others.
Yes.
Now, the first of these is usually pretended. The second is practically impossible. And the universal practice is for the third.
Yes, to return the censure of
To
others.
return the censure of others.
Which is what you have done.
The censure, Mr. Marlowe, is the tax that a man pays to the public for being eminent.
Yes, but you see, I'm still not clear as to your motives in lampooning and ridiculing the great men and women of our country, because you're not making yourself very clear, are you?
The motives of the best actions don't always bear too strict an inquiry.
Oh, come, Mr. Dean. Nobody has been stricter than you in inquiring into people's lives. You're surely not afraid of a taste of your own medicine.
But let me repeat what I said earlier. I was sent by Providence to defend a post assigned to me.
Yes.
My purpose has always been to gain over as many enemies as I could.
Well, I shouldn't think you've won over many so far. Mr. Dean, can I change the point slightly? I want to turn to perhaps the most outrageous work that even you have ever written. And I refer, of course, to your modest proposal for preventing the children of poor people from being a burden to their parents or country and making them beneficial to the public.
I did right.
Now, correct me if I've got the facts wrong, but did you or did you not advocate that young children here in Ireland should be sold at the age of 1 year for human flesh?
I did.
I'm not going to apologize for quoting again, because I want to be absolutely fair to you. You said, "I grant this food will be somewhat dear and therefore very proper for landlords, who, as they've already devoured most of the parents, seem to have the best title to the children." And then you went on, "Infants' flesh will be in season throughout the year, but more plentiful in March and a little before and after. For, as we are told by an eminent French physician, that fish being a prolific diet, there are more children born in Roman Catholic countries about 9 months after Lent than at any other season. Therefore, about a year after Lent, the markets will be more glutted than usual, because the number of popish infants is at least 3 to 1 in this kingdom, and therefore it will have one other collateral advantage by lessening the number of papists among us." And that plea for cannibalism came from you when you were the Dean of St. Patrick's Cathedral.
Really, Mr. Marlowe, really. I'm surprised that you didn't read what one very eminent critic said of my proposal. He said, and this time I quote, he said, "The Dean's plea for eating babies is made with all the refinement and the gentility one expects of a clergyman of the better class.
Yes, and that's exactly why I think it's the most dangerous piece of satire that you've written, because it's the credulity with which the proposal is uttered. Look, can I just quote against you again? Because one of your other critics said about this proposal, "We are dealing, it appears, with a good man who thinks it would be a good idea to eat babies, but will drop the idea immediately if anyone can think of one or two sensible reasons why it shouldn't be done."
Well, can you?
Well, of course, several, but this is no time to go into them now, because I want to hold you down on this enigmatic picture which you present to the world. You see, you're a God-fearing clergyman who advocates no mercy to be shown to nonconformists. You're also an Irishman who calls his fellow countrymen knaves and rogues, and you claim to wield your pen in the name of Providence, but you do it to hurt your fellow creatures.
But now, let me take your points one by one. First of all, I do not hate Ireland.
Yes.
The Irish are the loyalest people in the world. They endure great hardships. Now, nobody has fought harder than I have for the sake of the Irish Church.
Yes.
For the Protestant succession, against Papish pretenders, and against Scottish nonconformists.
You can't have the best of both worlds. You either hate the Irish or you don't. Now, which is it?
I do not hate Ireland. I hate being exiled here. I hate absentee landlords and absentee bishops. But above all, I hate the execrable corruptions which run through every branch of public management in this country.
But despite all these protestations, Mr. Dean, wouldn't it be true to say that your real allegiance is to England? If you could go back to England tomorrow as a bishop, wouldn't you forget all about the sufferings of the man in the street here?
But I won't get back now, will I, sir? Not while the Queen and that murdering old hag are running the country. I'm doomed to spend the rest of my life here, God help me.
Do you mean to say, then, that having been exiled, as you term it, here to Ireland by the English ruling classes, you're now going to vent all your hate and fury upon them?
I shall use my pen to fight for what I believe in, wherever I am.
Yes, but what do you believe in?
Oh, for heaven's sake, how many more times do I have to repeat to you that I was sent by Providence to be a clergyman, and that my one great motive in all my work is my submitting to the pleasure of that Providence?
But Mr.
Now,
Dean,
let me finish.
Certainly.
I have only ever advocated ideals or ideas which have the sanction of divine authority. The will of God is the source of my authority.
Yes, well, I'm sorry. I have no hotline to God myself, and therefore I find it very difficult to understand that you could have been instructed by Providence to hurt and to malign and to crucify your own fellow
Don't you
Christians.
dare question the will of God, sir.
It's your will I'm questioning.
And
Mr.
don't
Dean.
start behaving like a yahoo with me either, sir. I spent a great many years instructing people like you in all matters of this world, including manners, and yours are most offensive.
I'm
sir.
not trying to be offensive. I'm trying to get some straight answers to some straight questions. And I'm quite sure, Mr. Dean, that those questions can't hurt you any more than your attacks upon people who had no chance of replying. They must have found that very offensive indeed.
I did what I had to do because I was moved with such passion that I was prepared not only to destroy other people, but to see my own career ruined as a result of my outbursts.
I'm not criticizing your courage, Mr. Dean. There can be no question about this. What I am questioning is your motives. I mean, not only do you claim that you're doing God's work, but you also claim that your words are the very words of God.
They're one and the same thing.
Mr. Dean, would you deny that while you were at St. Patrick's, you turned that cathedral into a mini Vatican? You ruled with supreme power over your minions. You directed their studies, you supervised their lives, you looked after their health, and at one point, you even denied your bishop access to his own cathedral.
Yes, but if a man can't mend the public, then he'd better start mending old shoes. Because I'll have nobody around me who denies my authority.
Ah, your authority?
Yes, my authority.
Not God's.
Well, it's one and the same thing.
Not Providence's, but your supreme authority. And Mr. Dean, isn't that the key to your whole life? Having failed early on to achieve a position of power, you then spent the rest of your life in criticizing and attacking those who didn't like your way of life. Only you claim that this is the work of God. Isn't that true?
I did what I had to do. If what I wrote offended, it was intended to offend. I'm...
You attacked, in other words, everyone that you could possibly find, including the Duke of Marlborough.
Oh, including the Duke of Marlborough.
Yes.
Now, he was becoming all too powerful. He had illusions of being another Oliver Cromwell, another Julius Caesar. And I don't have to remind you, Mr. Marlowe, what happens to a country that's in the hands of a man who's drunk with power. I brought him down to earth.
Yes, but he wasn't the only one.
No, he wasn't. But no matter who I attacked, whether it's Queen Anne herself, I did so without fear or favor. Oh, I admit that I have made big men small, but I have also made small men big. I have wielded my pen against injustice, poverty, hypocrisy, and oppression wherever I found these things to exist. And I believe it is the birthright and privilege of every citizen to rail aloud in public, or to expose upon the stage, by name, if they so choose, anybody in the world, no matter how great.
Well, you certainly did that.
I did, sir, but never for money. I did what I had to do because it was my duty to God and to God alone. Now you, sir, would have everybody believe that I did all these things for self-glory.
Oh, no, I didn't suggest that, Mr. Dean.
No, be quiet, be quiet. You categorically stated that.
No, I did not.
You twisted my words to suit your own cheap argument. No. Now, let me ask you a few questions, Mr. Marlowe. What are your motives in submitting me to this inquisition tonight?
I, too, am doing my duty, Mr. Dean.
Your duty? Will you return the fee your masters give you? And who is your duty to, sir? To God or to your own self-glory? I leave you, sir, to consider your motives. I know what mine were.